A few days ago, my wife and I watched a film. And in this film, there were these people with superpowers. And we both agreed that the best superpower to have is the power to go back in time. That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? I want you to imagine that you've got this superpower. I want you to take a trip back in time with me. Not very long, just by a few years. Just take a moment. Let me paint the picture for you. The streets are empty. There's not a plane in the sky. The world seems such a silent place. The sun is out. We're told not to go to work. Of course, I'm talking about that year of lockdowns, 2020. Now, I've painted what seems like a very idyllic image. It was a glorious summer. Many of us took up hobbies. Some of us decided to get fit. Others decided to fix up our gardens. Some of us decided to fix up our homes. And many of us decided to take up baking. And as you can see, my wife was in the latter group. Our daily diet seemed to consist of homemade lemon drizzle cake, yum yum, Victoria sandwiches, chocolate cookies. But at a deeper level, we were all frightened. At a deeper level, we were frightened around this whole concept of death. We literally could not switch on the television without being told about the daily death numbers as a rising from COVID. We couldn't get onto our social media without people talking about loved ones passing away. Such was this sense of the fragility of life that it got many of us reflecting on our own lives in a very deep kind of way. We asked ourselves things like, am I happy? Am I living my life to its fullest potential? Am I adding value, or indeed, am I feeling valued in this world? As a result of these reflections, many of us made incredible decisions. For example, according to the UK Office for National Statistics, the divorce rates in 2021 increased by nearly 10% from 2020. And this whole idea around this recalibration of priorities, this understanding that we wanted our world to be different, impacted in the world of work even more. I found some statistics from the Bureau of National, I need to get this right, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States. And they said that 47 million people left their workplaces in 2021. And in 2022, that number went up to 50 million people. That's an incredible amount of numbers when you think about it, of people moving around in the workplace environment. Unheard of before. So big was this phenomena that it got its own name. It was called the Great Resignation, and a term that is popularly used around the world now. The thing is, we'd entered a whole new era. But this isn't the first time that we've gone through workplace thinking changes. I remember, because I'm of an age, when I first became a police officer in the early 80s. And the focus in most organizations then was the era of the what. The focus was on the what. What is it that we produce? What service do we deliver? And how can we do more of it? We saw an expansion of global trading, an expansion of things like outsourcing. And then we moved into the 90s. And in the 90s, we became slightly more refined. I remember departments being set up around best value, value for money. We wanted to look at continuous improvement. How do we do what we do, and how can we do it better? Things like concepts like Kaizen, Lean, Six Sigma, Total Quality Management, ISO, to name but a few, became all the rage in this constant desire to become even better. And then we got into the noughties. And we got even deeper. That was the era of the why. That's where we as organizations, as leaders, started asking ourselves, why do we exist? Real deep questions, actually, aren't they? Why do we do what we do? Where do we fit into society? What's our driving purpose? So much of the major brands around the world started talking about things like brand purpose. They started thinking about things like social responsibility, around sustainability. And even if you look at adverts now, many of the adverts don't actually talk about the product anymore. They talk about brand purpose. But that was nothing compared to 2020. That year that reshifted our priorities, that year that got us thinking about COVID and being locked down and changing our entire lives, that year that made us, that got us thinking around working remotely, working in isolation, increased anxiety levels, working in an environment where we felt that we weren't being valued enough. We thought life was much more important than that, simply going to work. We craved psychological safety in our workplace cultures. We demanded being valued in the workplace. We saw unprecedented industrial action in the United Kingdom and in Europe in modern times. We saw this great shift of people from organization to organization, the Great Resignation. We saw new terms like quiet quitting, where disenfranchised staff thought, do you know what? I'm only going to work to the minimum standard, not to my full potential. We had now entered the era of the who, where organizations really needed to wake up, to understand, to drive high performance. We really needed to understand and know people better. Who are our people? How do we understand them better? How can we work with them better? Who are our clients? This whole shift towards understanding people and human-centric cultures was a challenge for many organizations. And many of the organizations I work with now are still struggling with this challenge. I call this human-centered leadership. It's the embedding of emotional intelligence into our culture. It's the creating of environments where people come to work and they feel valued, they feel appreciated, they feel heard, and they feel seen. If we can get that right, then imagine what kind of workplace we would have. Imagine what kind of performance we would drive in our workplaces. I remember at the age of 16, born and bred in this very city, my single desire as a young boy was to become a police officer. I applied to literally every single police force in this country. I failed 26 times, and on the 27th occasion, I was successful. But it meant me moving from this town, this city that I was born in, to a rural county. It was the furthest I'd ever moved and traveled by myself in my entire life. Knowing that I would have to go to a place where I would live among strangers, as excited as I was, filled me with this mind-numbing fear. When I landed in my first police posting, my first police station, I was in a mining town. I looked up and a realization hit me. I was a brown speck in a sea of white. Many of the community had never even seen a person like me, let alone speak to one. Then a second realization hit me. And this is probably the most powerful realization that has ever hit me. And it stays with me today. That if I want to get really successful in anything that I do, I needed to get really good at understanding people and building great relationships. For the next 2 years, I worked so hard, not just on proving myself to be a great cop, but also on building relationships with everybody around me. From my colleagues, through to the community, from shopkeepers through to residents, even with some of our most popular customers. where I got it to the point that I could knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I need you to come to the police station tomorrow because I need to arrest you. And most of the time they would come. I went back to that small town very recently just to take a trip down memory lane. I was there in a service station filling my car up with gas, and this chap comes up to me. He was huge. He had muscles on his muscles. He had tattoos everywhere. And he came up to me, and I thought, what's going on here? And he put his hand out. He said, I want to shake your hand. He said, you won't remember me, but when I was a young lad, I was being arrested all the time for fighting. He said, and of all the police officers that ever arrested me, you were the most decent, and I respect you for that. Oh, thank you very much. I said, so what are you doing now? He said, well, I've just come out of prison. I was in there for fighting. I mean, I was just happy that he liked me as he walked away. So these were the early revelations that I had as a young adult, and they have served me well ever since. I didn't know what I was doing until in the 1990s. I picked up a book and I read about emotional intelligence. And I read about a chap called Daniel Goleman, who is probably one of the leading authorities on emotional intelligence, and he described it as one of the most important human intelligences we can have. And the first two critical aspects of emotional intelligence can apply to every single person here. They are self-awareness and self-management. And I'm still on this journey of self-awareness and self-management. And what that has allowed me to do is build relationships with as wide a variety of people as possible. It's about looking at myself through other people's eyes, so I can get a multi-dimensional perspective of who I am. So I'm not stuck in this one dimension. I'm seeing myself as this ego personality. It's allowed me to get inside my own mind so I can step back, take a mental step back from conversations and situations that might evoke an emotional response. It served me well in the police service, and you can imagine I was in a lot of situations where I had to make tough decisions, where I was able to make logical decisions using this formula. As a result of learning all of this, it has allowed me to make huge transformational changes across the police service. I've worked at senior governmental levels to bring about national policy change. I've driven large-scale transformation projects, both in the police service and in other organisations, and I continue to support the client organisations that I work with now to do exactly the same. Human-centered leadership is very simply about taking an interest in people and being actively interested in people. I remember when I was managing large departments of several hundred people, I would take an hour out of my diary in the morning and an hour out of my diary in the afternoon, simply so I could do what I call management by walkabout. And it really was me talking to people and learning more about them. Had they just got married? Were they going through a difficult time? Was somebody in their family suffering with something? Was there a celebration that we needed to be aware of? Did they have pets? I remember one such occasion I was talking to a member of staff, and he was saying to me, I've just passed a degree in communications. I was like, wow, that's incredible. Guess what? I had just launched a major transformation project that needed a communication strategy writing. So I was able to second them onto the project, and they benefited from that and also added value to a very, very important piece of work. Had I not met him or spoken to him, I would never have known this. So human-centered leadership is really about creating environments built on foundations of trust, where people are seen, valued, heard, and appreciated. If we can get that magic sauce right, then we can create environments where people can come to work and be their full self at work. Things like inclusivity will become a natural byproduct. If we can welcome people into the organization and see them as a potential resource, because everyone has a different pathway in life. If we can accept these different pathways and encourage them to sit around the organizational conversation table and bring in their viewpoints, then we could drive creativity and innovation. And if there's one thing I can say with absolute certainty, with all the work that I do with so many organizations, is that the pace of change in this world is not slowing down. It is getting faster and faster and faster. And there are so many facets to this whole idea of transformation, from AI and digital on one side through to budget cuts on the other side. People sit at the heart of everything around that. And things like creativity, innovation, adaptability, agility will remain the biggest factors that you will need to drive success in your organization. So what can you do? Some of you may say, well, I'm not a leader. I'm not working in an organization. Well, first, every single person is a leader. If you're influencing anybody else, you are a leader. If you're influencing any circumstance, you are a leader. And the biggest lesson that I can give to you from my experience is take an interest in people. Learn to be a human-centered leader. Thank you.